Henrietta Morrison dropped to her knees in the dirt of Main Street, her trembling hands reaching for the scattered pieces of bread that had been her only meal in 3 days. The summer sun burned against her back as Boots shuffled past her, not one person stopping, not one person caring. Her uncle stood in the doorway of his store, watching her crawl, and did nothing. "Please," she whispered to no one. "Please." But Copper Creek had already decided what she was worth. Nothing. If you want to see how one woman's darkest moment became her greatest beginning, stay with me until the very end. Hit that subscribe button and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far Hetty's story travels. The stagecoach driver didn't offer his hand. Henrietta Morrison climbed down by herself, her worn boots hitting the dust of Copper Creek, Wyoming territory with a hollow thud. The July heat wrapped around her like a punishment, and sweat already soaked through the back of her brown homespun dress, the only dress she owned. She heard it immediately. The whisper. "Lord Almighty, look at the size of that one." Henrietta kept her chin up. She'd learned that trick years ago. How to pretend she didn't hear, didn't feel, didn't break a little more with every cruel word. She was 24 years old, built broad and heavy, with strong arms and a soft belly that no amount of hard work had ever changed. "Hetty!" She turned toward the voice. Her Uncle George stood in front of Morrison Mercantile, his name painted proud across the storefront. He looked older than she remembered. Harder. "Uncle George." She allowed herself a small smile. "I came as soon as I got your letter. You said you needed help in the store, and I—" "That was 6 months ago." The words hit like a slap. "I know." Hetty swallowed hard. "I couldn't leave Mother until she passed. The funeral cost everything we had. I wrote to you. Didn't you get my letters?" George Morrison folded his arms across his narrow chest. His eyes moved over her body the way a man might examine livestock he'd decided not to buy. "I got 'em. Then you know I had nowhere else to go. You're the only family I have left. You said in your letter that—" "That was before." "Before what?" George glanced over his shoulder, where a woman had appeared in the store's doorway. Pretty, thin, wearing silk in the middle of a Wyoming summer, like she had something to prove. "Before I got married," George said flatly. "Cordelia wouldn't appreciate having company." Hetty felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "I'm not company. I'm your niece, your brother's daughter." "Half-brother." The correction landed like a knife between her ribs. Hetty stared at the man who shared her blood, searching for some trace of the uncle who'd bounced her on his knee when she was small, who'd given her peppermint sticks and called her his favorite girl. That man was gone. Maybe he'd never existed at all. "Please." The words scraped out of her throat. "Just a few weeks, until I can find work, find somewhere to—" "Find work?" George's wife stepped forward, her silk skirts rustling with self-importance. She had a pretty face twisted into something ugly by the smile she wore. "Doing what exactly? No one in Copper Creek is going to hire that." She didn't gesture, didn't need to. Everyone knew what she meant. Hetty's hands clenched in her skirt. "I'm strong. I can lift heavy things, keep books, clean, cook." "I'm sure you can cook." Cordelia's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "That much is obvious." The words hung in the summer air. A few townspeople had stopped to watch. Hetty could feel their eyes on her, drinking in her humiliation like entertainment. "George?" She turned back to her uncle, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I'm begging you. 1 week. Just give me 1 week to figure something out. I'll sleep in the storeroom. I won't eat much. "Won't eat much," Cordelia snorted. "That would be a first." "Enough." George held up his hand, and for one bright moment, Hetty thought he was defending her. Then he said, "You need to leave, Henrietta. You're causing a scene, and that ain't good for business." "I'm causing a scene?" I'm standing here asking my own family for help." "Keep your voice down." "Why? Because people might hear? Because they might know you're turning away your dead brother's only child?" George's face went red. He stepped closer, dropping his voice to a hiss. "Listen here. I don't owe you nothing. Your daddy made his choices when he married that Irish woman, and—" "Don't!" Hetty's voice cracked. "Don't you dare talk about my mother. She filled your head with ideas above your station, made you think you were worth something when anyone with eyes can see." He stopped himself, but the damage was done. "Can see what?" Hetty whispered. George said nothing. He didn't need to. "Tell me." Her voice shook with fury and grief. "Say it out loud. What can anyone with eyes see?" Cordelia answered for him. "That you're an embarrassment. A great lumbering cow of a woman with no prospects and no place in decent society. My husband's business depends on appearances, and having you around would be—" "That's enough, Delia." The voice came from behind Hetty, low, quiet, but sharp enough to cut through Cordelia's poison like a blade through butter. Hetty turned. An older woman stood on the boardwalk, gray-haired and weathered, with hands that had clearly known hard work. She wore a practical dress, no silk, no pretension, and she was looking at Cordelia Morrison with something close to contempt. "Mrs. Patterson." Cordelia's smile had gone stiff. "I don't believe anyone asked. I don't believe anyone needed to." The woman, Mrs. Patterson, walked closer, her boots solid on the wooden planks. She stopped beside Hetty and looked her over, but not the way the others had, not measuring her worth by the width of her hips. "You're George Morrison's niece?" "Yes, ma'am." "Your daddy was Thomas Morrison? The one who went east and married for love instead of land?" Hetty's throat tightened. "You knew my father?" "Knew him well. He was the only Morrison with a lick of sense, or a scrap of decency." Mrs. Patterson shot a look at George that could have curdled milk. Clearly that didn't pass down. George sputtered. "Now see here, Martha. I'll see what I please, George Morrison, and what I see is a young woman in need of Christian charity, being turned away by her own kin, while half the town watches like it's a show." Mrs. Patterson took Hetty's arm, firm but gentle. "Come on, girl. My husband's got a store down the street. It ain't much, but we got coffee, and we got sense, and we got a sight more hospitality than this lot." Hetty let herself be led away. She didn't look back at her uncle, didn't look at his wife's smug smile or the watching crowd. She just walked, one foot in front of the other, holding herself together by sheer force of will. They were halfway down Main Street when her legs gave out. It wasn't dramatic. No great collapse, no swooning, just her knees buckling, her body reminding her that she hadn't eaten in 3 days, hadn't slept properly in weeks, hadn't stopped carrying the weight of grief and fear and exhaustion since her mother's last breath. Mrs. Patterson caught her before she hit the ground. "Easy now. When's the last time you ate?" Hetty couldn't answer. Couldn't find the words past the shame burning in her throat. "That long, huh?" Mrs. Patterson's arm tightened around her waist. "Lord have mercy. Come on, just a little further." Patterson's general store was smaller than her uncle's, shabbier, but the moment Hetty stepped inside, she felt something unclench in her chest. It smelled like coffee and leather and home. A man emerged from the back room, Mr. Patterson, presumably, round-faced and kind-eyed, with a magnificent gray mustache. "Martha? What's all this?" "Thomas Morrison's girl. Just got off the stage." George turned her away. Mr. Patterson's expression shifted from confusion to understanding to quiet fury. Of course he did. That man's got ice water where his blood should be. He looked at Hetty with genuine warmth. "Sit down, miss. You look about ready to fall over." Hetty sank into the chair he offered, her whole body trembling. Mrs. Patterson pressed a cup of coffee into her hands. Hot, strong, bitter, perfect. "Drink that. Then you're going to eat something." "I can't pay." Did I ask for payment? Mrs. Patterson's voice was sharp, but her eyes were soft. You drink that coffee, and you let me worry about the rest. Hetty drank. The warmth spread through her, loosening the knot of fear in her stomach. For the first time since she'd stepped off that stagecoach, she didn't feel completely alone. What am I going to do? She hadn't meant to say it out loud. The Pattersons exchanged a look, the kind married people share when they're having a whole conversation without words. Well, Mr. Patterson said slowly, we ain't got much, but we got a spare room upstairs. You can stay there tonight at least. Tomorrow we'll figure out something more permanent. I can work, Hetty said quickly. I'm strong. I can haul freight, stock shelves, clean. I don't doubt it. Mr. Patterson's smile was kind but sad. But I gotta be honest with you, miss. I can barely afford to keep this place running as it is. George Morrison's got the market cornered, and he ain't shy about squeezing out competition. There's gotta be something. Mrs. Patterson drummed her fingers on the counter. What about the hotel? The restaurant? They'll say no. Hetty's voice was hollow. They always say no. The silence that followed was heavy with truth. Well, Mrs. Patterson straightened her shoulders, then we'll find something they ain't thought of yet. But that's tomorrow's problem. Tonight, you eat, you rest, and you let yourself breathe. Understood? Hetty nodded, not trusting her voice. That night, she lay in the small room above Patterson's store, staring at the ceiling. Through the thin walls, she could hear the sounds of Copper Creek settling into darkness. Laughter from the saloon. Horses on the street. Someone playing a harmonica, badly. She thought about her mother, dead now 6 weeks, buried in a Boston cemetery Hetty would probably never see again. She thought about her father, gone these 10 years, his only legacy, a daughter no one wanted, and a brother who'd rather pretend she didn't exist. She thought about tomorrow, and the day after, and all the days stretching ahead like an empty road leading nowhere. For the first time since she was a little girl, Henrietta Morrison cried. 3 days passed. 3 days of walking from business to business, hat in hand, dignity scraping thinner with each rejection. The hotel manager said they weren't hiring. The restaurant owner said she wasn't what they were looking for. The laundry, the seamstress, the livery stable. Everyone had an excuse. And everyone's eyes told the same story her uncles had. By the 4th morning, Hetty's money was gone. The coin she'd scraped together from her mother's belongings, the few dollars she'd saved from selling their furniture, all of it spent on stage fare and the cheap room above Patterson's store. She sat on the bench outside the general store, watching the town move around her. Women in their fine summer dresses shopping for ribbons and lace. Men conducting business, tipping hats, making deals. Children running in the dusty street, their laughter sharp as broken glass. No one looked at her, except to look away. Miss Morrison? Hetty lifted her head. A boy stood before her, maybe 12 years old, skinny as a rail, with bare feet despite the summer hot ground. Yes? My name's Tommy. I work odd jobs around town. The boy shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. I heard you was looking for work. Word travels fast. Everything travels fast in a town this small. Tommy glanced around, then lowered his voice. There might be something, but nobody else wants to do it. Hetty's heart kicked against her ribs. What is it? Supply run up to Garrett's place. He's got a ranch way up in the hills, about 4 hours' ride from here. Mr. Patterson's been trying to find someone to haul his order up there for weeks, but everyone's too scared. Scared of what? Of Mr. Garrett. Tommy's eyes went wide with the dramatic flair of a boy who'd grown up on tall tales. He lives alone up there. Never comes to town except when he absolutely has to. My pa says he killed men in the war. My ma says he's half wild. Either way, ain't nobody wants to go up there. What does he need supplies for? Same as anyone, I reckon. Flour, coffee, ammunition. But he pays well. Real well. Mr. Patterson says he'll give $5 to whoever makes the delivery. $5. Hetty stood up so fast she made Tommy take a step back. Where's Mr. Patterson? She found him in the back of the store, inventorying barrels of flour, with a worried expression that deepened when he saw her face. Miss Morrison, something wrong? Tommy told me about the supply run, to Garrett's place. Patterson's expression shifted. Now, hold on, $5. I'll do it. Miss Morrison, Patterson set down his ledger. Silas Garrett ain't like other folk. He's been through things that changed him, made him hard, cold, some say. I don't need him to be warm. I need $5. The trail up to his place ain't easy. Steep terrain, narrow passes. I grew up on a farm, Mr. Patterson. I can handle a horse and a rough trail. And if Garrett don't take kindly to strangers? If he turns you away at the door, or worse? Hetty looked Patterson straight in the eye. Then I'll deal with it, same as I've dealt with everything else in my life. Patterson was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed, the sigh of a man who knew he was beat. Trail starts at the north end of town. You'll want to leave at first light. I'll have everything packed and ready on a mule. Garrett's place is marked by a wooden sign at the turnoff. You can't miss it if you're paying attention. Thank you. Hetty grabbed his hand and shook it. Thank you, Mr. Patterson. Don't thank me yet. His grip was firm, his eyes serious. Silas Garrett's got a reputation for a reason. You be careful up there, you hear? Hetty nodded. Careful. Right. She'd been careful her whole life, and look where it had gotten her. Begging for scraps in a town full of strangers, turned away by her own blood, running out of options faster than she could count them. Maybe it was time to try something else. That evening, Hetty sat in the Pattersons' kitchen, eating a bowl of stew she'd tried to refuse 3 times before Mrs. Patterson threatened to spoon-feed her like a child. Tell me about Silas Garrett, Hetty said between bites. Mrs. Patterson and her husband exchanged one of their looks. What do you want to know? Mrs. Patterson asked carefully. Everything. If I'm riding up to his place alone, I'd like to know what I'm walking into. Mr. Patterson leaned back in his chair. Silas came here about 8 years ago, right after the war ended. Bought a piece of land up in the hills. Good land, but hard to work. Built himself a cabin and just stayed. He doesn't have family? Had a wife. Mrs. Patterson's voice softened. Pretty thing from what I heard. She died a few years back. Childbirth. And the baby with her. Hetty's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. Since then, Mr. Patterson continued, Silas barely comes to town, once every few months for supplies, and even then, he doesn't talk to nobody if he can help it. Folks started telling stories, the way folks do, saying he's dangerous, that he's gone mad from the solitude, all kinds of nonsense. Is it nonsense? Another exchanged look. I think, Mrs. Patterson said slowly, he's a man carrying more pain than most folks can imagine. And I think the town decided it was easier to call him crazy than to treat him like a human being who'd suffered a terrible loss. Hetty set down her spoon. Sounds familiar. Mrs. Patterson reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I thought it might. That night, Hetty lay awake again, but this time it wasn't fear keeping her up. It was something else. Something that felt almost like hope. A man the whole town had given up on. A woman the whole town had rejected. Maybe, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, they'd understand each other. Or maybe she was riding straight into trouble. Either way, she'd find out tomorrow. The dawn broke clear and hot over Copper Creek. Hetty was at Patterson's store before the sun had fully risen, her carpet bag packed with everything she owned, which wasn't much, and her mother's cameo pinned over her heart like a talisman. Patterson had the mule ready and waiting, loaded down with canvas-wrapped supplies. Beside it stood a bay mare with patient eyes and a steady stance. Her name's Molly, Patterson said, handing Hetty the reins. She knows the trail better than most people. Trust her instincts if you get turned around. Hetty swung herself up into the saddle, ignoring the way Molly sidestepped at her weight. She was used to that. Used to horses that weren't expecting someone like her. One more thing. Patterson handed her a canteen and a small cloth bundle. Water and jerky. It's a long ride, and you'll need your strength. Thank you. Hetty tucked the supplies into her saddlebag. For everything, Mr. Patterson. You and your wife, you're the only people in this town who've treated me like a human being. Then this town's got a lot to answer for. Patterson stepped back, his face serious. You be safe up there, Miss Morrison, and don't let Silas Garrett scare you off. Underneath all that gruff, I think he's probably just as lonely as... He stopped himself, but Hetty heard the rest of the sentence anyway. As lonely as you. She clicked her tongue and nudged Molly forward, the mule plodding along behind. The town slipped away as she rode north. Buildings gave way to scattered cabins, then to wilderness. The trail began gently enough, following a creek through stands of cottonwood and pine. But as she climbed higher, the path grew steeper, narrower. By midday, sweat soaked through her dress, and her legs ached from gripping the saddle. The summer heat was brutal up here, even with the altitude, and Hetty found herself rationing the water in her canteen more carefully than she'd planned. But she didn't turn back. She wouldn't turn back. Whatever waited for her at Silas Garrett's ranch, it had to be better than what she'd left behind. The sun was beginning its descent when she finally saw it. A cabin tucked into a fold of the hills, backed by trees and fronted by a wide meadow dotted with wildflowers. Smoke curled from the chimney. A corral held 2 horses, both of which raised their heads at her approach. Hetty's heart hammered as she guided Molly across the meadow toward the cabin. This was it. The door was closed. No sound came from within. She dismounted, tied Molly and the mule to the porch rail, and climbed the 2 steps to the door. Her knock echoed in the silence. Nothing. She knocked again. Mr. Garrett? I've got your supplies from Patterson's store. Still nothing. Patterson had warned her this might happen, that Garrett might refuse to answer, might simply wait her out until she gave up and left. She was already turning away, planning to leave the supplies on the porch, when the door swung open. The man who stood there wasn't what she'd expected. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the hard, weathered look of someone who'd spent years working outdoors. His hair was dark and needed cutting. His beard was thick, but surprisingly neat. And his eyes. His eyes were the pale gray of winter ice, and they moved over her with the kind of assessment she'd come to expect from everyone. Measuring, calculating, dismissing. Hetty braced herself for the disgust. It didn't come. Patterson sent you? His voice was rough, like he wasn't used to speaking. Yes, sir. I've got your supplies. Alone? Yes, sir. Something flickered in those pale eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or curiosity. That's a hard trail for anyone, he said. Harder still for a woman on her own. Hetty lifted her chin. I managed. Silas Garrett studied her for a long moment. Then, to her shock, his mouth twitched into something that might have been a smile. I reckon you did. He stepped past her and began unloading the mule, his movements quick and efficient. Hetty watched, uncertain whether she should help or stay out of his way. You're Morrison's niece, he said without looking at her. The one he turned away. Of course he knew. Everyone knew. Word travels fast, she said bitterly. Even up here. Garrett hefted a bag of flour onto his shoulder. Your uncle's a fool. Hetty blinked. I'm sorry? A fool. Garrett carried the flour inside and came back for another load. Any man who turns away his own blood because he's too proud or too weak to face down a few gossiping hens deserves every bad thing coming to him. Hetty didn't know what to say. In 4 days of rejection and humiliation, no one, not one single person except the Pattersons, had said anything like that. Garrett finished unloading in silence, then counted out coins from a leather pouch. He pressed them into Hetty's hand. $7. That's too much, she said automatically. Patterson said 5. Patterson ain't the one making this payment. Garrett's eyes met hers. You made that ride alone, through heat that would have dropped a lesser person. You earned every cent. Hetty looked down at the coins in her palm, then back up at the man in front of her. Why are you being kind to me? The question came out before she could stop it. Garrett's jaw tightened. Because kindness is in short supply around here. And because... He stopped, something dark crossing his face. Because I know what it's like to be the person nobody wants around. He turned and walked back into his cabin. The door closed behind him with quiet finality. Hetty stood on the porch for a long moment, the 7 silver dollars warm in her hand, trying to understand what had just happened. She'd come up here expecting hostility, or, at best, indifference. She hadn't expected to be seen. But Silas Garrett had looked at her, really looked, and seen something besides her size, her poverty, her shame. He'd seen a person who'd done a hard thing and done it well. He'd seen someone worth $7 instead of 5. He'd seen her. The sun was sinking toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Hetty knew she should start back down, should try to make it to town before full dark. But something held her in place. The door opened again. Garrett stood there, his expression unreadable. "Trail's dangerous at night," he said gruffly. "You can sleep in the barn if you want. Head back at first light." "I don't want to impose." "It ain't imposing if I'm offering." He nodded toward the small barn beside the cabin. "There's hay in the loft, blankets in the chest. It ain't fancy, but it's dry." Hetty hesitated. Every instinct told her to refuse, to maintain her independence, to keep what little dignity she had left. But her legs were shaking with exhaustion, and the thought of that dark trail in the dark night made her stomach turn. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'll leave at first light." Garrett nodded once and closed the door again. Hetty led the animals to the barn, settled them with feed and water, and climbed to the hayloft as the last light faded from the sky. She lay there in the darkness, wrapped in a rough wool blanket that smelled of cedar and horse, listening to the sounds of the mountain night. Wind in the trees, an owl calling somewhere in the distance, the soft shuffle of horses settling below. For the first time since leaving Boston, Henrietta Morrison felt something loosen in her chest. Not quite hope, not yet, but something close. She woke to the sound of an axe splitting wood. Hetty sat up in the hay, disoriented for a moment, her body stiff from sleeping on the hard loft floor. Then memory flooded back. The ride, the cabin, Silas Garrett's pale eyes looking at her like she was actually worth seeing. She climbed down from the loft and stepped outside into the cool morning air. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but Garrett was already working, his shirt sleeves rolled up, sweat darkening the fabric between his shoulder blades, despite the early hour. He didn't stop when she approached, just kept swinging that axe with steady, precise strokes that split each log clean in two. "Coffee's on inside," he said without looking at her. "Help yourself." Hetty hesitated. "I should get back to town. I don't want to—" "You should eat first." The axe came down. Split. "Trail's hard enough without doing it on an empty stomach." It was the same thing he'd said last night about sleeping in the barn. Not an invitation, exactly, more like a statement of fact that happened to benefit her. Hetty went inside. The cabin was smaller than she'd expected, but clean. A fireplace dominated one wall, a pot of coffee warming beside the flames. The furniture was simple, but well made. A table, 2 chairs, shelves lined with books and supplies. Everything had its place. Everything spoke of a man who'd learned to live alone and made peace with it. She poured herself a cup of coffee and drank it standing by the fire, not wanting to presume too much by sitting down. The warmth spread through her, easing the ache in her muscles. The door opened behind her. "There's bread in the box on the counter," Garrett said, crossing to the fireplace. "And some dried venison if you want it." "I can't keep taking your food." "You ain't taking nothing. I'm offering." He poured his own coffee, his movements economical, precise. "There's a difference." Hetty watched him over the rim of her cup. In the morning light, she could see things she'd missed last night. The lines around his eyes, deeper than they should be for a man his age. The way he held himself, like someone expecting a blow that never quite came. The careful distance he kept, even in his own home. "How long have you lived up here alone?" she asked. Garrett's hand paused on his cup. "Long enough." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting." But his voice wasn't harsh, just tired. "Eat something before you go." Hetty ate. The bread was fresh, which surprised her, and the venison was better than anything she'd had in weeks. She tried not to wolf it down like a starving animal, but her body had other ideas. When she looked up, Garrett was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "When's the last time you had a real meal?" "I've been eating." "That ain't what I asked." Hetty set down the bread. "Does it matter?" "It might." Garrett leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Patterson's been trying to find someone to make regular supply runs up here for months. Nobody wants the job. You made the ride without complaint, handled the trail fine, didn't flinch when you saw me." "Should I have flinched?" Something flickered in his eyes. "Most people do." "I'm not most people." "I'm starting to figure that out." Garrett was quiet for a moment. "I could use someone reliable. Twice a month, same arrangement. $5 a trip. More if I need extra supplies hauled up." Hetty's heart stuttered. "You're offering me regular work?" "I'm offering you a job. Whether you take it is up to you." $10 a month. It wasn't enough to live on by itself, but combined with whatever else she could scrape together, it might be enough to survive. Might be enough to stop feeling like she was drowning every single day. "Why?" The word came out before she could stop it. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Garrett's jaw tightened. "I know what it's like to have the whole world decide you ain't worth helping. I know what it's like to stand in the middle of a town full of people and feel more alone than if you were the last person on earth." "Is that why you live up here? To get away from them?" "I live up here because it's the only place I can breathe." His voice was rough, raw. "Because every time I went to town, I could see them looking at me like I was something broken, something dangerous. And after a while, I started to believe them." Hetty set down her coffee cup. "What happened to you?" Silence stretched between them, heavy and sharp. "That's a story for another day." Garrett pushed off from the doorframe. "You should get going. Patterson will worry if you don't show up soon." The dismissal was clear, but Hetty didn't feel offended. She understood walls. She had plenty of her own. "I'll take the job," she said. "Thank you." Garrett nodded once. "First delivery is in 2 weeks. Patterson will have the supplies ready." Hetty gathered her things, saddled Molly, and led her out of the barn. Garrett was back at the woodpile, axe in hand, but he paused when she mounted up. "Miss Morrison." She turned in the saddle. "Folks in town are going to talk about you coming up here, about you staying the night." His eyes met hers. "They'll say things, ugly things. You need to be ready for that." "I've been dealing with ugly things my whole life, Mr. Garrett. A few more whispers won't break me." That almost smile crossed his face again. "No, I don't reckon they will." Hetty clicked her tongue and guided Molly toward the trail. She didn't look back, but she could feel his eyes on her until the trees swallowed her from view. The ride down was easier than the climb up. Molly knew the way, and daylight made the dangerous sections less terrifying. Hetty reached Copper Creek by mid-morning, her body aching but her spirits higher than they'd been since arriving in Wyoming. She returned Molly and the mule to Patterson's stable. The old man was waiting, relief washing over his face when he saw her. "Thank the Lord. I was starting to worry." "No need." Hetty dismounted, her legs protesting. "Mr. Garrett paid me fairly and offered me regular work. Twice a month supply runs." Patterson's eyebrows shot up. "Silas Garrett offered you a job? Is that so surprising?" "Miss Morrison, Silas Garrett hasn't voluntarily spoken more than 10 words to anyone in this town in 3 years. And now he's hiring you for regular work?" Patterson shook his head slowly. "I don't know what you said to him up there, but whatever it was, it made an impression." "I didn't say much of anything. I just did my job and didn't treat him like a monster." "Maybe that's what impressed him." Patterson handed her the $5 they'd agreed on, adding it to the $7 Garrett had given her. $12. That's more than most men make in a week." $12. Hetty stared at the coins in her palm, feeling something she barely recognized. Hope. "I need to find more work," she said. "The supply runs won't be enough to live on. Is there anything else? Anything at all?" Patterson scratched his chin. "There might be. Martha's been talking about needing help with the household. Cooking, cleaning, laundry. It ain't glamorous, but it's honest work, and we can offer room and board, plus a small wage." Hetty's throat tightened. "You've already done so much." "We ain't done nearly enough." Patterson's voice was firm. "Your daddy was a good man, Miss Morrison. One of the best I ever knew. Helping his daughter ain't charity. It's paying back a debt that's long overdue." That afternoon, Hetty moved her meager belongings from the spare room to a proper bedroom in the Patterson house. Mrs. Patterson showed her around, explaining her duties, introducing her to the rhythm of the household. It wasn't much. A small room, a narrow bed, work that would leave her exhausted every night. It was more than she'd had in months. She fell asleep that night, feeling almost safe. The feeling didn't last. 3 days later, Hetty was hanging laundry behind Patterson's store when she heard the voices. "Did you hear? Morrison's niece spent the night at Silas Garrett's place." "Alone with that man? Lord have mercy." "I always knew there was something wrong with her. A decent woman would never—" Hetty's hands clenched on the wet fabric. She recognized one of the voices. Cordelia Morrison, her uncle's wife, holding court like she was the queen of Copper Creek. "I mean, look at her." Cordelia's laugh was sharp as glass. "What man would want that unless he was desperate? And Silas Garrett is certainly desperate enough." More laughter, more whispers. Hetty hung the last sheet with trembling hands and turned to go inside. She made it 3 steps before Cordelia's voice rang out. "Oh, Henrietta, leaving so soon?" Hetty stopped, turned. Cordelia stood on the boardwalk with 2 other women, all of them dressed in their finest summer gowns, all of them wearing identical smiles of malicious delight. "We were just talking about you," Cordelia continued sweetly, "about your new arrangement with Mr. Garrett." "I deliver supplies to his ranch. There's nothing improper about it." "Of course not." Cordelia's eyes glittered. "I'm sure your overnight stay was perfectly innocent. Just 2 lonely people keeping each other company in that remote cabin, all alone, miles from anyone who might—" "I slept in the barn." "So you say." "So I say because it's the truth." Cordelia stepped closer, her perfume cloying in the summer heat. "Let me give you some advice, dear. Woman to woman. A girl in your position can't afford to have her reputation questioned. And Silas Garrett—" She paused dramatically. "Well, he's not the sort of man a respectable woman associates with. He's been more decent to me than anyone in this town." "Has he?" Cordelia's smile turned sharp. "Or has he just found a woman desperate enough to give him what he wants without asking too many questions?" The insinuation hit like a slap. Hetty felt her face burn, felt the familiar shame rising in her chest. The old voice that whispered she deserved this, that she'd never be worth anything, "That's quite enough, Cordelia." Mrs. Patterson's voice cut through the air like a whip crack. She stood in the doorway of the store, her arms crossed, her weathered face set in lines of cold fury. "I don't believe anyone asked for your opinion, Martha. Cordelia said stiffly. "And I don't believe anyone asked for yours, but that's never stopped you before." Mrs. Patterson stepped forward until she was between Hetty and the other women. "Miss Morrison works for me now. She's under my roof and my protection. If you've got something to say about her, you can say it to me." Cordelia's smile faltered. "I'm merely concerned about the girl's welfare." "You're concerned about having someone new to torment, now that you've run out of victims willing to stand still for it." Mrs. Patterson's voice was steel wrapped in honey. "But this one's got people looking out for her. Remember that." The silence stretched, taut as a wire about to snap. Finally, Cordelia gathered her skirts with a huff. "Come, ladies. Clearly we're not wanted here." They swept away down the boardwalk, but not before Cordelia shot one last look at Hetty, a look that promised this wasn't over. Mrs. Patterson watched them go, then turned to Hetty with eyes that had gone soft. "Don't let them get to you, girl. They're small people with small lives, and making others feel bad is the only way they know to feel good about themselves." Hetty's hands were still shaking. "I didn't do anything wrong." "I know. And deep down, they know it too. That's what makes them so angry." Mrs. Patterson put an arm around her shoulders. "Come inside. I'll make tea." But as Hetty followed her into the store, she couldn't shake the feeling that Cordelia Morrison wasn't done with her yet. 2 weeks passed. Hetty fell into a rhythm, cooking and cleaning for the Pattersons, helping in the store when needed, counting the days until her next supply run. The whispers continued, but she learned to ignore them. Learned to hold her head high and keep walking, no matter what poison was hissed in her wake. The morning of her second trip to Garrett's ranch, she woke before dawn and found Mrs. Patterson already in the kitchen. "I packed you extra food," the older woman said, pressing a bundle into her hands. "And don't argue. That man up there probably hasn't had a decent meal in months. Someone needs to look after him." "He's not my responsibility." "No," Mrs. Patterson's eyes were knowing. "But you look out for him anyway. I've seen it, the way you check what supplies he's ordering, making sure he's got everything he needs. You care about him. I barely know him." "Sometimes that doesn't matter." Mrs. Patterson squeezed her hands. "Be careful up there, and don't let him push you away when he gets scared." Hetty didn't know what to say to that. She just nodded and headed for the stable. The ride up was familiar now. Her body remembered the rhythm of Molly's gait, the steep switchbacks, the narrow passes where the trail dropped away into nothing. She reached Garrett's cabin by early afternoon. He was on the porch, waiting. "You're early," he said. "I left before dawn." "Why?" Hetty dismounted and began unloading the mule. "Because I wanted to. Because Mrs. Patterson sent extra food, and I figured you'd argue if I tried to give it to you with witnesses." Garrett's eyebrow rose. "Food?" "Fresh bread, apple pie, some kind of stew that's supposed to be good reheated." Hetty hauled a basket off the mule and thrust it at him. "Don't say you can't accept it. It's from Mrs. Patterson, not me." Garrett took the basket, looked inside. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or something closer to pain. "I haven't had apple pie in 4 years," he said quietly. "Then it's past time you had some." Hetty grabbed another bundle and carried it inside, not waiting for an invitation. The cabin was the same as before, clean, sparse, carefully organized. But this time, Hetty noticed things she'd missed. A woman's shawl folded on a shelf, a pair of small knitting needles tucked into a basket, a sketch pinned above the fireplace, a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She didn't ask, didn't need to. Her name was Sarah. Hetty turned. Garrett stood in the doorway, the basket still in his hands, his eyes fixed on the sketch. "She was my wife. She died 3 years ago. Childbirth. The baby, too." "I'm sorry." "Everyone's sorry." His voice was hollow. Nobody could do anything about it, but they were all real sorry. And then they started whispering, saying I should have brought her to town sooner, saying if I'd been a better husband, she wouldn't have died alone in this cabin while I rode for help that came too late. That's not fair. Fair's got nothing to do with anything. Garrett set the basket on the table. I stopped going to town after that. Couldn't stand seeing their faces. Couldn't stand hearing them talk about her like they knew her, like they had any right to judge what happened. Hetty moved closer. Is that why you helped me? Because you know what it's like to be judged? Partly. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, Hetty saw the full weight of what he carried. Grief so deep it had reshaped him. Loneliness so profound it had become a second skin. And partly because you're the first person in 3 years who's looked at me like I'm still human. Something cracked in Hetty's chest. Something she hadn't known was still whole enough to break. You are human, she said softly. No matter what they say. No matter what you've convinced yourself. You're human, and you're worth more than a life spent alone on this mountain. Garrett's jaw tightened. You don't know that. I know you paid me more than you owed. I know you let me stay when you could have sent me away. I know you offered me work when nobody else would. Hetty stepped closer. I know you're kind, even when you're trying real hard not to be. I'm not kind. I'm just what? He didn't answer, but something in his eyes shifted. A door opening, just a crack, letting in light that hadn't been there before. Stay for supper, he said roughly. The trail's dangerous at night, and I want to hear about what's happening in town. The real version, not what Patterson puts in his letters. Hetty should have said no. Should have kept her distance, protected herself, remembered that getting attached to anyone in this godforsaken territory was a recipe for heartbreak. All right, she heard herself say, but only if you eat some of that pie. Garrett's mouth twitched. Yes, ma'am. They ate together at his small table, the stew Mrs. Patterson had sent heated over the fire with fresh bread and butter. Hetty told him about life in Copper Creek, about the Pattersons' kindness, about Cordelia's cruelty and the whispers that followed her everywhere. Garrett listened without interrupting. When she finished, his face was hard. Your uncle's wife needs someone to knock her down a peg. Won't do any good. Women like her always land on their feet. Maybe, maybe not. Garrett pushed back from the table. People like Cordelia, they're only powerful because everyone lets them be. The minute someone stands up to them, really stands up, they crumble like dried clay. Speaking from experience? Speaking from observation. I've seen plenty of bullies in my time. The ones in silk dresses ain't any different from the ones in uniform. They just use words instead of fists. Hetty helped clear the dishes, and when they were done, she found herself reluctant to leave. The cabin felt safe in a way that nowhere else did. Garrett felt safe in a way that no one else did. I should go, she said, not moving. You should stay. Garrett's voice was quiet. The barn's still there. The blankets are clean. People will talk. People talk anyway. Might as well give them something real to gossip about. He paused. That came out wrong. I know what you meant. Hetty smiled despite herself. You're not as smooth as you think you are, Mr. Garrett. I never thought I was smooth. Good, because you're not. He laughed, a short, rusty sound like something that hadn't been used in years. But it was real, and it changed his whole face, made him look younger, softer, almost handsome. The barn, he said again. First light, you can head back. Hetty nodded. First light. She didn't sleep much that night. She lay in the hayloft, wrapped in the same cedar-scented blanket, listening to the sounds of the mountain night and thinking about the man in the cabin below. He was broken. Anyone could see that. But so was she. Maybe that was why they understood each other. Two damaged people finding something familiar in each other's wounds. Or maybe it was something else entirely. She pushed the thought away and closed her eyes. but it followed her into her dreams anyway. Morning came too soon. Hetty climbed down from the loft to find Garrett already outside, saddling Molly. He handed her a bundle, bread and dried meat, enough for the ride back, without a word. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." "Just doing what's right." "Most people don't." "Then most people are fools." He helped her mount, his hand warm and steady under her elbow. "Be careful on the trail, and don't let them grind you down." "I won't." She was halfway across the meadow when his voice stopped her. "Miss Morrison." She turned. Garrett stood on his porch, backlit by the rising sun, and something in his posture had changed. Something determined. Something that made her heart beat faster. "2 weeks is a long time," he said. "If you wanted to come up sooner, just to check on things, I wouldn't mind." Hetty felt her lips curve into a smile. "I'll think about it." "You do that." She rode down the mountain with the sunrise warming her back and something strange blooming in her chest, something that felt dangerous and terrifying and wonderful all at once. She was still feeling it when she reached Copper Creek, still feeling it when she returned Molly to the stable and walked toward Patterson's store. She was still feeling it when she saw the crowd gathered on Main Street, and then she saw what they were gathered around, and the feeling shattered like glass on stone. Her Uncle George stood in the middle of the street, his face purple with rage, pointing at something on the ground. At someone. "This is what happens to women who forget their place," he was shouting. "This is what happens to whores who disgrace their families." Hetty pushed through the crowd, her heart hammering. And then she saw it. Saw her. Mrs. Patterson lay crumpled in the dirt, her face bloody, her dress torn. And standing over her, fist still raised, was Hetty's Uncle George. Hetty didn't think, didn't hesitate, didn't feel the crowd pressing around her, or hear the gasps and whispers. She moved. Her body crashed into her uncle's before he could land another blow. The impact sent them both stumbling, but Hetty kept her footing, while George went down hard on one knee. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" George scrambled up, his face twisted with fury. "This ain't your concern. You're beating a defenseless woman in the middle of the street." Hetty dropped to her knees beside Mrs. Patterson, her hands trembling as she checked for serious injuries. "Mrs. Patterson, Martha, can you hear me?" The older woman groaned, her eyes fluttering open. Blood trickled from a cut above her eyebrow, and her lip was split. But she was conscious. Alive. "I'm all right, girl," Mrs. Patterson whispered. "I'm all right." "She's far from all right." George's voice rose to a shout. "That woman has been harboring my niece, helping her carry on her disgraceful behavior with that hermit in the mountains. She deserves everything she got." Hetty rose slowly, placing herself between her uncle and Mrs. Patterson. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice came out steady. "Touch her again, and I'll kill you." The words dropped into silence. Even George seemed stunned. "You threatening me, girl?" "I'm making a promise." Hetty's hands clenched at her sides. "Mrs. Patterson has shown me more kindness in 2 months than you've shown me in my entire life. She's more family to me than you ever were." "Family?" George's laugh was ugly. "She's nothing but a meddling old woman who doesn't know her place, just like you don't know yours." "And what is my place, Uncle? Begging for scraps? Crawling in the dirt while you watch?" Hetty stepped closer, close enough to see the veins pulsing in his temple. "I remember what you were like when I was a child. You used to give me peppermint sticks. You used to call me your favorite girl. What happened to that man?" Something flickered in George's eyes. Pain, maybe, or shame. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. "That man didn't know what you'd become." "I haven't become anything except what the world made me. A woman trying to survive in a place that doesn't want her." Hetty's voice cracked. "I came to you for help. I was hungry and alone and scared, And you turned me away because of how I look, because you were embarrassed to be seen with me. I had reasons. You had pride. That's all. Stupid, worthless pride. Hetty gestured at the crowd around them. Look at them, Uncle. Look at all these people watching you beat an old woman in the street. Is this what your pride bought you? Is this who you wanted to be? George's face went from red to purple. His hand rose, and Hetty braced herself for the blow. It never came. A hand caught George's wrist in mid-swing, stopping it cold. Hetty looked up into Silas Garrett's pale gray eyes. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Silas said quietly. The crowd went absolutely still. Silas Garrett, the hermit of the mountains, the man who hadn't set foot in town proper in 3 years, stood in the middle of Main Street, with his hand wrapped around George Morrison's arm like a vice. Let go of me, George snarled. This is a family matter. Looked to me like you were about to hit a woman. That ain't a family matter. That's assault. She's my niece. She's a human being. Silas's voice was ice. And if you ever raise your hand to her again, you'll answer to me. He released George's wrist with a shove that sent the older man stumbling back. George caught himself on a hitching post, his eyes wild with fury and something else. Fear. You've got no right, George spat. No right to interfere in my business. Your business stopped being yours when you made it public. Silas moved to stand beside Hetty, his shoulder brushing hers. The whole town just watched you beat Martha Patterson bloody. The whole town just watched you try to strike your own niece. You think they're going to forget that? George looked around at the faces surrounding them. Some were shocked. Some were disgusted. A few, the ones who'd always followed Cordelia's lead, looked uncertain, like they weren't sure whose side to be on anymore. This ain't over, George said through gritted teeth. Not by a long shot. He pushed through the crowd and disappeared into his store. The door slammed behind him hard enough to rattle the windows. Hetty let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. You came, she said, turning to Silas. How did you know? Saw your uncle riding out yesterday with 2 of his cronies. Figured they were up to something. Silas's jaw was tight. I should have gotten here sooner. You got here in time. Hetty looked down at Mrs. Patterson, who Mr. Patterson was helping to her feet. Is she going to be all right? She needs a doctor, Mr. Patterson said, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. That bastard broke her nose. Maybe some ribs, too. I'll fetch Dr. Collins, someone called from the crowd. I'll help get her inside, another voice added. People were moving now, the shock wearing off, replaced by something that looked almost like shame. They'd all stood there and watched, every single one of them. And now they were scrambling to make amends. Too little too late, Hetty thought bitterly. But she didn't say it. Instead, she helped support Mrs. Patterson as they made their way inside the store. The older woman leaned heavily on her, wincing with every step. I'm sorry, Mrs. Patterson whispered. I'm so sorry, Hetty. You have nothing to be sorry for. I do. I told him to leave you alone. Told him he was a disgrace to your father's memory. Mrs. Patterson's laugh came out as a pained cough. Guess he didn't appreciate that. You defended me? Of course I did. Someone had to. Mrs. Patterson squeezed her hand weakly. You're worth defending, girl. Don't ever let anyone tell you different. They got her settled in the back room just as Dr. Collins arrived. He was a young man, new to town, with steady hands and kind eyes. He took one look at Mrs. Patterson and ushered everyone out except Mr. Patterson. She'll need rest, he said. But she'll recover. She's tougher than she looks. She's tougher than most men I know, Hetty said quietly. Silas was waiting for her in the store's front room. He stood by the window, watching the street, his face unreadable. Thank you, Hetty said, for stopping him. Didn't do it for thanks. I know, but thank you anyway. Silas turned to face her. Your uncle ain't gonna let this go. A man like that, he's been humiliated in public. He'll want revenge. What can he do? He's already taken everything from me. Not everything. Silas's eyes met hers. He can take your reputation, what's left of it. He can make sure no one in this town will hire you, shelter you, speak to you. He can turn you into a pariah. I'm already a pariah. Not like what's coming. Trust me. Hetty felt the truth of his words settle into her bones. She thought she'd hit bottom when she arrived in Copper Creek. She'd been wrong. There was always further to fall. What do I do? Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that stopped her heart. You could marry me. Hetty stared at him. What? Marry me. Become Mrs. Garrett. My name would protect you in ways nothing else can. Your uncle couldn't touch you, couldn't claim authority over you, couldn't do a damn thing without going through me first. You can't be serious. I'm always serious. We barely know each other. I know enough. Silas's voice was steady. I know you're strong. I know you're kind. I know you don't treat me like I'm something broken that needs fixing. That's more than most people I've known my whole life. Hetty's mind raced. Marriage. To Silas Garrett. The hermit. The man the whole town feared. The man who'd lost his wife and child and buried himself in the mountains to escape his grief. What about Sarah? She heard herself ask. Silas flinched like she'd struck him. What about her? You loved her. You still love her. I can see it, every time you look at that sketch above your fireplace. Hetty's voice softened. I won't be a replacement, Silas. I can't be. I'm not asking you to replace her. I'm asking you to be my partner. My wife-in-law, if not in... He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. I ain't expecting anything from you. Separate rooms, separate lives, if that's what you want. Just my name and my protection. That's not a marriage, that's an arrangement. Lots of marriages are arrangements. At least this one would be honest. Silas stepped closer. I ain't gonna pretend I love you, Hetty. I don't know if I'm capable of that anymore. But I respect you. I admire you. And I'll be damned if I stand by and watch your uncle destroy you when I've got the power to stop it. Hetty's throat tightened. It wasn't the proposal she dreamed of as a girl. Wasn't candlelight and flowers and pretty words. It was practical, logical, almost cold. And yet there was something in Silas's eyes that made her believe it could be more. Something that looked almost like hope. Can I think about it? Take all the time you need. She didn't get time. 2 days later, George Morrison filed a complaint with the sheriff, claiming Hetty had assaulted him and threatening to have her arrested unless she returned to his guardianship. It's nonsense, Mr. Patterson said, his face pale with fury. You were defending Martha. Everyone saw it. Everyone saw what they wanted to see, the sheriff said. He was a thin man with nervous eyes, and he wouldn't meet Hetty's gaze. George Morrison is a respected businessman. His word carries weight. His word is a lie. That's for a judge to decide. Until then, Miss Morrison needs to either return to her uncle's custody or find herself a legal guardian. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. Or a husband. The word hung in the air like a sentence. Give me until tomorrow, Hetty said quietly. Please. The sheriff nodded, clearly relieved to be done with the matter, and hurried out. That night, Hetty sat in her small room above Patterson's store, turning her mother's cameo over in her hands. The face painted on it looked nothing like her mother had looked at the end, thin and wasted by illness. But the eyes were the same. Kind. Knowing. Sad. What do I do, Mama? Hetty whispered. What would you tell me to do? The cameo offered no answers. It never did. But somewhere in the silence, Hetty found her own. She found Silas at dawn, waiting outside the store like he'd known she was coming. Maybe he had. Maybe he'd been waiting all night. "Yes," she said without preamble. Silas didn't smile, didn't move, just nodded once, like they'd concluded a business transaction. "We'll need witnesses. The preacher won't do it without." "The Pattersons." "Good. Tomorrow morning, first thing." "Tomorrow?" "Your uncle's got until sundown to make his move. We need to be married before then." The reality of it hit Hetty like a punch to the gut. Tomorrow. She was getting married tomorrow. To a man she barely knew, for reasons that had nothing to do with love. "You sure about this?" she asked. "Really sure?" "I've been sure since the moment I offered." Silas's eyes met hers, and for once, they weren't guarded. "You're the first person in 3 years who's made me feel like maybe I ain't better off alone. That's worth something to me." "It's worth something to me, too." They stood there in the early morning light, not touching, not speaking, but somehow connected anyway. Two broken people agreeing to be broken together. It wasn't love, but it was something. The wedding was the smallest ceremony Copper Creek had ever seen. Just Hetty and Silas, the Pattersons as witnesses, and old Reverend Mills, who'd agreed to perform the service despite his obvious misgivings. Hetty wore her brown homespun dress, the only one she owned. Silas wore his cleanest shirt, which still had patches on the elbows. Neither of them had rings. It didn't matter. "Do you, Silas Garrett, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Henrietta Morrison, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Hetty looked at Silas. At his pale gray eyes, his weathered face, his hands that had known so much work and so much loss. This man who'd seen her when everyone else looked away. This man who'd offered her safety when the world offered only cruelty. "I do." "Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you man and wife." Silas leaned in and pressed a brief kiss to her forehead. Chaste, almost brotherly. The kiss you'd give a child, not a bride. It was over in less than 10 minutes. They signed the papers. Mrs. Patterson cried, though whether from joy or concern, Hetty couldn't tell. Mr. Patterson shook Silas's hand and told him to take care of his girl, and then they stepped out onto Main Street as husband and wife. George Morrison was waiting for them. He stood in front of his store with Cordelia on one side and the sheriff on the other. His face was purple with rage, his hands clenched at his sides. "This farce won't stand," George spat. "I'll have it annulled. She's not fit to make decisions for herself. She's clearly been manipulated by this. By her husband?" Silas's voice was calm, cold, deadly. "That's what I am now, Morrison. Her legal husband. Which means she's not your concern anymore. Not your responsibility. Not your property. She's my niece! And now she's my wife. The law's real clear on which one of those takes precedence." George turned to the sheriff. "Do something!" The sheriff held up his hands. "The marriage is legal, George. There's nothing I can do." "There has to be something. She's a disgrace. She's standing right here," Hetty said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "And she can speak for herself." Everyone turned to look at her. George, Cordelia, the sheriff, the growing crowd of onlookers who'd gathered at the first sign of confrontation. Hetty stepped forward until she was face to face with her uncle. "I came to you hungry and scared and desperate," she said quietly. "I begged you for help, and you looked at me like I was garbage, like I wasn't worth the dirt on your boots." Her voice grew stronger. "But I'm still here. I found work when you said no one would hire me. I found friends when you said no one would want me. I found a husband when you said no man would have me. That man's no prize. That man is worth 10 of you." Hetty's voice rang across the street. "He's kind when the world expects cruelty. He's honest when everyone else is false. He saw me, really saw me, when you couldn't even look at me without disgust." George's face twisted. "You're a fool. He's using you. Can't you see that? The only thing I see is a man who's running out of ways to control me." Hetty smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "That's what this is really about, isn't it? Not my reputation, not family honor, just control. You couldn't stand that I found a way to survive without you." "That's not—" "It is. It's exactly what it is." Hetty turned to address the crowd. "My uncle turned me away when I had nowhere to go. His wife called me names in the street, and when Mrs. Patterson showed me basic human kindness, he beat her bloody for it." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Patterson was well liked. George's attack on her had not been forgotten. "I didn't come to Copper Creek looking for trouble," Hetty continued. "I came looking for family, for safety, for a chance to work hard and make something of myself. Instead, I found cruelty and judgment and a town that decided I wasn't worth helping because of how I look." She felt Silas move to stand beside her. His hand found hers, his grip warm and steady. "But I also found good people. The Pattersons, who took me in when no one else would. Mr. Garrett, who gave me honest work and treated me with respect. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's more than a lot of people ever get." Hetty looked at her uncle one last time. "I'm done begging for your approval. I'm done trying to earn a place in a family that never wanted me. From this day forward, I'm Henrietta Garrett. My husband's people are my people. His home is my home. And if you ever try to hurt me or mine again, you'll find out exactly what that means." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Cordelia stepped forward, her face twisted with spite. "You think you've won?" Her voice was shrill. "You think this changes anything? You're still what you've always been, a great fat cow who couldn't get a real man if she tried. Silas Garrett only married you because he's too pathetic to attract anyone else. You deserve each other." "That's enough, Delia." The voice came from behind Cordelia. An older woman stepped forward from the crowd, Margaret Holloway, the mayor's wife. She was small and gray-haired, the kind of woman who usually faded into the background at social gatherings. But she wasn't fading now. "I've kept quiet for years while you poisoned this town with your cruelty," Margaret said, her voice shaking with something that might have been fear or might have been courage held too long in check. "I've watched you tear people down just to feel powerful. I've listened to you mock anyone who didn't meet your standards of beauty or wealth or breeding." "Margaret, I'm not finished." Margaret's eyes blazed. "When I first came to this town, you told everyone my dresses were out of fashion and my husband had married beneath him. When Sarah Jenkins had her baby, you said the child was too ugly to show in public. When Martha Patterson's daughter got sick, you told people she'd brought it on herself through poor hygiene." The crowd stirred. More women were stepping forward now, their faces set with determination. "You called me a simpering fool," one of them said. "You told everyone my husband was seeing other women," another added. "You said my children would never amount to anything." One by one they came forward. A dozen women, then 24, each with their own story of Cordelia's cruelty, each with years of silence finally breaking open. Cordelia's face went from white to red to something close to green. "This is ridiculous," she stammered. "George, tell them—" But George was backing away, his eyes darting between his wife and the growing mob of angry townswomen. The sheriff had already melted into the crowd, wanting no part of whatever was about to happen. "I think," Margaret Holloway said slowly, "that it's time for some changes in Copper Creek, starting with who we allow to speak for us, starting with whose opinions we value." She turned to Hetty, and her eyes were warm. "Mrs. Garrett, I owe you an apology. We all do. We should have stood up to Cordelia years ago. We should have welcomed you when you arrived, instead of letting her turn us against you." Hetty didn't know what to say. After months of rejection, the sudden shift was almost too much to process. She swallowed hard. Thank you. Don't thank us. We don't deserve it. Margaret looked at Cordelia one more time, her expression hardening. I think you should go home, Cordelia. And I think you should stay there for a good long while. This town's got some healing to do, and it'll be easier without you around. Cordelia opened her mouth to protest, closed it, opened it again. No sound came out. She grabbed George's arm and practically dragged him back to their store. The door slammed behind them with a crash that echoed across the silent street. And then, impossibly, someone started to clap. More joined in. Within moments, the whole crowd was applauding. For Margaret, for the women who'd spoken up, for Hetty, for the fat girl nobody wanted who'd somehow brought a town together. Hetty's vision blurred with tears. Silas's hand tightened on hers. Let's go home, he said quietly. Home. The cabin in the mountains. The place where she'd first felt seen. Yes, Hetty whispered. Let's go home. They rode out of Copper Creek together, husband and wife, leaving behind a town that was finally, painfully, starting to change. But as the buildings disappeared behind them and the mountains rose ahead, Hetty couldn't shake the feeling that their story was far from over. Cordelia Morrison had been humiliated. George Morrison had been defeated. Wounded animals were always the most dangerous. And somewhere behind them, in a store on Main Street, her uncle was already planning his next move. The cabin felt different now. Hetty stood in the doorway, her carpetbag in hand, suddenly uncertain. This was her home now, legally, permanently. The thought made her chest tight with something she couldn't name. The bedroom's yours, Silas said from behind her. I'll take the loft and the barn like before. Silas, that's not... It's what we agreed. His voice was gentle but firm. This marriage is for your protection. I ain't going to take advantage of that. Hetty turned to face him. And what if I want more than protection? The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither was ready to examine. Silas's jaw tightened. You don't know what you want yet. You're scared and grateful and confused. Give it time. Figure out who you are here, who we are together. Then we'll talk about what comes next. It was the kindest rejection she'd ever received. All right, she said quietly. Time. The first week passed in careful choreography. They moved around each other like dancers learning new steps, polite and watchful, always aware of the other's presence without quite acknowledging it. Silas taught her how to tend the garden, how to preserve vegetables for winter, how to read the sky for weather changes. His hands were patient when he showed her how to hold the hoe, how to check soil moisture, how to identify which plants were ready for harvest. He never touched her longer than necessary, never stood too close, never let his eyes linger the way Hetty sometimes caught herself lingering on him. But she noticed things. The way he'd leave coffee warming by the fire before she woke. The way he'd set aside the best pieces of meat for her plate. The way he'd pause his work when she walked by, watching her with something in his eyes that looked almost like wonder. You're staring, she said one evening, catching him at it. Silas looked away quickly. Sorry. I didn't say stop. His eyes came back to hers, and this time they didn't look away. What are you doing, Hetty? I don't know. It was the truth. But I'm tired of pretending there's nothing happening between us. There can't be anything happening. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Why? Because I made a vow to a woman I loved, and she's been dead 3 years, and I still feel like I'm betraying her every time I look at you. The words came out raw, torn. Because you deserve better than a man who's broken in places he don't even know how to find anymore. Hetty moved closer. Maybe I'm broken too. Maybe that's why we fit. Hetty, I'm not asking for love, Silas. I know you can't give me that. But I am asking you to stop running from whatever this is." She stopped an arm's length away. "I'm asking you to let yourself feel something, even if it's just a little, even if it scares you." Silas stood frozen, his whole body rigid with the effort of holding himself back. "You don't know what you're asking." "Then show me." The silence stretched between them, tight as a bowstring about to snap. Then Silas reached out and cupped her face in his calloused hands. His touch was tentative, almost reverent, like he was handling something precious that might shatter at any moment. "I don't know how to do this anymore," he whispered. "Neither do I." Hetty covered his hands with hers. "We'll figure it out together." He kissed her then. Not the chaste brush of lips from their wedding, but a real kiss, deep and searching and hungry. Hetty gasped against his mouth, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Silas rested his forehead against hers. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Me too." "I can't promise. I know. I'm not asking for promises." Hetty looked into his pale gray eyes. "I'm just asking for tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out the rest." That night, Silas didn't sleep in the barn. They lay in the narrow bed together, fully clothed, not quite touching but close enough to feel each other's warmth. It was enough. More than enough. It was a beginning. "Tell me about Sarah," Hetty said into the darkness. Silas was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then his voice came, rough and low. She was small, delicate, had a laugh that could light up a room, and a temper that could burn it down. He paused. "We met at a church social in Colorado. I was 22, fresh off the war, angry at everything and everyone. She saw through all that anger to something worth saving. Or at least, she thought she did. She was right. Maybe. Maybe not." Silas shifted beside her. "We came out here to start over, build something new. Had 3 good years before she got pregnant. We were so happy, so damn happy." "What happened?" "The baby came early. Sarah started bleeding and couldn't stop. I rode for the doctor, but he was 2 hours away, and by the time I got back," his voice cracked, "she was gone. The baby, too. A little girl. I never even got to hear her cry." Hetty reached for his hand in the darkness. "I'm sorry." "The town blamed me, said I should have moved her to town before she got too far along. Said I was selfish, keeping her isolated up here. And maybe they were right. Maybe if I'd done things different, she'd still be alive. Or maybe she'd have died anyway, and you'd be blaming yourself in a different way." Hetty squeezed his hand. "Grief makes us find reasons, makes us think we could have stopped the unstoppable. But sometimes, terrible things just happen, and there's nothing anyone could have done." Silas turned his head toward her. In the dim light filtering through the window, she could see tears tracking down his weathered face. "How'd you get so wise?" "I watched my mother die slow over 2 years. Consumption. There was nothing the doctors could do, nothing I could do, except sit beside her and hold her hand while she slipped away." Hetty's throat tightened. "I blamed myself for a long time. Thought if I'd worked harder, made more money, gotten her better care. But the truth is, some things can't be fixed. Some people can't be saved. And learning to live with that is the hardest lesson there is." Silas's hand tightened on hers. "When did we get so broken?" "I think we always were. We just finally found someone who speaks the same language." They fell asleep like that, hands intertwined, 2 wounded souls finding comfort in shared pain. The weeks that followed changed everything. Silas started touching her more. Casual brushes of contact that meant nothing and everything at the same time. A hand on her shoulder as he passed, fingers grazing hers when he handed her tools. His palm warm against the small of her back as they walked together in the evening. And Hetty started to believe that maybe, just maybe, this marriage of convenience could become something real. She was wrong. The riders came on a Tuesday. Hetty saw them first, 3 figures on horseback cresting the ridge above the meadow. She dropped the basket of vegetables she'd been carrying and ran for the cabin. "Silas!" He was already at the door, rifle in hand, his face hard as stone. "Get inside. Don't come out until I tell you." "Who are they?" "I don't know, but 3 men riding together up here ain't ever brought good news." Hetty went inside but stayed by the window, watching as the riders approached. They were rough-looking, dressed like miners or drifters, and something about the way they carried themselves made her skin crawl. Silas stepped off the porch to meet them, his rifle held loose but ready. "Far enough," he called when they were 20 feet away. "State your business." The lead rider, a big man with a scar across his cheek, grinned. "You Silas Garrett?" "Who's asking?" "Name's Jennings. I work for George Morrison. He's got a message for you." Hetty's blood went cold. "I ain't interested in messages from Morrison," Silas said flatly. "Oh, I think you will be." Jennings leaned forward in his saddle. "See, Mr. Morrison's been doing some research. Found out some interesting things about your past. Things you probably don't want getting out." Silas's grip tightened on the rifle. "Get off my land." "The war, for instance." Jennings's grin widened. "What was it they called you? The Butcher of Benton Creek? Something about a whole company of Confederate prisoners that never made it to the camp." "That's a lie." "Is it? Mr. Morrison's got affidavits from 3 men who say different. Says you lined them boys up and shot them yourself. 97 men. Some of them not much more than boys." Hetty's hand flew to her mouth. She saw Silas's shoulders stiffen, saw the color drain from his face. "Whatever Morrison's paying you," Silas said quietly, "it ain't enough for what I'll do to you if you don't leave right now." Jennings laughed. "Easy, friend. We ain't here to fight. Just delivering a message." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and tossed it on the ground. "Mr. Morrison wants his niece back. You got 1 week to annul the marriage and send her home. If you don't, these affidavits go to every newspaper in the territory. Your reputation, such as it is, will be destroyed. And that's just the start. And if I comply, then the papers disappear, and everyone goes on with their lives. Simple as that." Silas didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even seem to breathe. 1 week, Garrett." Jennings turned his horse. "Don't be stupid." They rode away, disappearing over the ridge as quickly as they'd come. Hetty was out the door before the dust settled. "Silas?" He stood like a statue, the rifle hanging loose in his grip, his face ashen. "Silas, talk to me." "Go inside." "No, tell me what—" "I said, go inside." His voice cracked like a whip, and Hetty flinched back. He'd never raised his voice to her, never even come close. She picked up the paper Jennings had thrown. The handwriting was her uncle's. She'd recognize that cramped, precise script anywhere. The message was brief. "Return my niece or face the consequences. You know what I have. You know what I'll do with it." "What did you do?" Hetty asked quietly. "During the war? What really happened?" Silas finally moved, sinking onto the porch steps like his legs couldn't hold him anymore. The rifle clattered to the ground beside him. Benton Creek was a field hospital. We'd just taken it from the Confederates. There were wounded on both sides, nowhere near enough doctors, not enough supplies to save everyone. His voice was hollow, dead. "I was a sergeant. My commanding officer gave me an order. The Confederate prisoners were using resources that could save Union men. He told me to take care of it." "Take care of it?" "Execute them." Silas's hands began to shake. 97 men, some of them screaming for their mothers, some of them praying, some of them just staring at me with eyes that knew what was coming. Hetty felt sick. "Did you do it?" "I refused. Told my CO I'd see him in hell before I shot unarmed prisoners. Silas looked up at her, and his eyes were ancient with pain. So he had someone else do it. And then he wrote in his report that I was the one who gave the order. When the war ended, there was an investigation. I was cleared eventually. Witnesses came forward, proved I wasn't even there when the shooting happened. But the rumors never died. That's why I came west. That's why I live alone. Because everywhere I go, the story follows. But you are innocent. Innocents don't matter when people want to believe the worst. Silas laughed bitterly. Your uncle found the one thing that could destroy me without being true. Hetty knelt beside him, taking his shaking hands in hers. Then we fight back. We find the witnesses who cleared you, get them to write new statements. They're probably dead by now. It's been 11 years. And even if they're not, by the time we track them down, the damage will be done. Morrison will spread those lies everywhere. No one will want to do business with me. No one will sell me supplies. I'll lose everything. Then we leave. Go somewhere nobody knows us. And what happens when the story follows? Because it will. It always does. Silas pulled his hands free and stood abruptly. This is my fault. I should never have married you. I knew something like this could happen, knew there were people who'd use my past against me, but I was so damn desperate to save you that I didn't think about what it might cost. Silas, you need to go back. The words hit her like a physical blow. What? Go back to your uncle. Tell him you made a mistake. Get the marriage annulled and... No. Hetty, listen to me. I said no. She stood to face him, her hands clenched at her sides. I didn't marry you just for protection. Maybe that's how it started, but it's not how it is now. I care about you. I'm not going to abandon you because some bully threatens to spread lies. They're not lies. Not entirely. Men died that day. I was there. I could have done more to stop it. You refused an illegal order. You stood up for what was right. And 97 men still died. But not because of you. Hetty grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. You are not responsible for what other men did. You are not the monster they tried to make you, and I am not leaving you to face this alone. Silas stared at her, his pale eyes swimming with emotion she couldn't read. Why? He whispered. Why would you stay? Because you're my husband. Because you're a good man who deserves better than what life has given him. Because... She swallowed hard. Because I love you. And I didn't expect to. And it scares me half to death. But there it is. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Silas's arms came around her, crushing her against his chest, his face buried in her hair. I don't deserve you, he said hoarsely. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. They held each other for a long time, there on the porch, with the summer sun warming their backs and the weight of impossible choices pressing down on them both. So what do we do? Hetty asked finally. Silas pulled back, and something had changed in his face. The despair was still there, but underneath it was something harder, stronger. We go to town, he said. We tell our side of the story before Morrison can tell his, and we find out exactly what he's got and how he got it. And if the town doesn't believe us, then we make them believe, one way or another. They rode down the mountain together, husband and wife, armed with nothing but the truth and the desperate hope that it would be enough. Copper Creek was busy when they arrived, the streets full of people going about their daily business. But conversation stopped when Silas and Hetty rode in. Eyes followed them. Whispers started. They've heard already, Hetty said quietly. Morrison works fast. Silas's jaw was tight. Straight to Patterson's. They dismounted outside the general store. Mr. Patterson emerged before they could knock, his face grave. I was hoping you'd come. You need to see something. He led them inside, to the back room, where Mrs. Patterson sat at a table covered in papers. Her face was still bruised from George's attack, but her eyes were sharp. "I've been doing some digging," she said without preamble. "After what George did to me, I figured I had a right to know who I was dealing with. So I wrote some letters, called in some favors." She pushed a stack of papers toward them. "These are the real records from Benton Creek. I got them from a friend in Washington who works in the War Department archives." Silas picked up the papers, his hands trembling. "How? My brother was a clerk in the Adjutant General's office. He never liked how you were treated after the war. Said the whole thing smelled wrong." Mrs. Patterson pointed to a specific document. "Look at that. The official investigation report. Shows exactly who gave the order, who carried it out, and who tried to stop it." Silas read the document, his face going pale, then flushed, then pale again. "This clears me. Completely. It does more than that. It names your commanding officer as the one responsible. Charles Morrison." Hetty's blood froze. Morrison? George Morrison's older brother. He was court-martialed and shot for war crimes in 1866. Mrs. Patterson's smile was grim. "George has been covering up his brother's sins for years, letting you take the blame. Those affidavits he's threatening you with? They're forgeries. I'd bet my life on it." "But why? Why would he let his own brother's crimes be blamed on someone else?" "Because the Morrison name means everything to him. Because admitting the truth would destroy his family's reputation." Mr. Patterson spoke up from the doorway. "And because as long as you were the villain, no one would look too closely at Charles Morrison." Silas set down the papers. His hands weren't shaking anymore. "Where is George now?" "His store, probably celebrating his victory." Mr. Patterson's eyes glittered. "Shall we go spoil his party?" The confrontation happened in the middle of Main Street, in front of the whole town. George Morrison emerged from his store to find Silas Garrett waiting for him, with Hetty on one side, the Pattersons on the other, and a growing crowd of onlookers pressing in behind. "Garrett, I wasn't expecting you so soon." George's smile was oily with confidence. "Come to negotiate terms?" "Come to expose a liar." George's smile flickered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I'm talking about Benton Creek, about your brother Charles, about the men he murdered and the man he blamed for it." The color drained from George's face. "That's ancient history." "Not anymore." Silas held up the documents. "I've got the real records here. The investigation. The court-martial. Your brother was executed for war crimes, George. Shot like the coward he was. And you've been covering it up ever since." "Those are forgeries." "They're official War Department documents. Stamped, signed, verified." Silas stepped closer. "Your brother was the butcher of Benton Creek, not me. You've known that all along, and you've used the lie to destroy anyone who threatened you. You can't prove I can. I will. And by tomorrow, every newspaper in the territory will have copies of these documents." Silas's voice rang across the street. "Your family name won't be worth the paper it's printed on." George's face went from white to red to purple. His hands clenched at his sides. "You think you've won? You think this changes anything?" His voice rose to a shout. "My brother was a hero. He did what had to be done. Those Confederate prisoners were animals, murderers. They deserved a trial." Hetty stepped forward, her voice cutting through George's ranting. "They deserved justice. They deserved to live." "What would you know about it? You weren't there." "I know that 97 men died because your brother decided their lives didn't matter. I know that you've spent years destroying anyone who might reveal the truth. And I know that ends today." George lunged at her. Silas moved faster. His fist connected with George's jaw, sending the older man sprawling in the dirt. George scrambled up, reaching for the gun at his hip. But Silas was already there, wrenching the weapon away. "It's over, Morrison." George stared at him, hatred burning in his eyes. "This isn't over. This will never be over. I'll destroy you both. You'll what?" Margaret Holloway pushed through the crowd, her face set with righteous fury. "You'll what, George? Beat another woman? Threaten more innocent people? Drag your family's shame into the light for everyone to see? Stay out of this, Margaret. I've stayed out of too much for too long. We all have." She turned to address the crowd. "This man has terrorized our town for years. He's driven away good people, ruined reputations, hurt anyone who stood against him. And we let him because we were afraid." She pointed at Silas and Hetty. "These two have more courage than the rest of us combined. They stood up to him when no one else would. And now it's our turn." Her voice rose. "I say George Morrison's time is over. I say we show him what this town does to bullies and liars and cowards." The roar that went up from the crowd was deafening. George Morrison looked around at the faces surrounding him. Faces that had once shown fear, now showing something closer to fury. He looked at his wife, who stood frozen in the doorway of their store. He looked at the sheriff, who was very carefully studying his own boots. And then, for the first time in his life, George Morrison ran. He shoved through the crowd, ignoring the hands that grabbed at him, and disappeared into his store. The door slammed. The lock clicked. "Should we go after him?" someone asked. "Let him hide." Silas's voice was tired but satisfied. "He's finished, and he knows it. The town will handle things from here." Hetty slipped her hand into his. "It's really over?" "The hard part is," Silas looked down at her, and something in his eyes had finally eased. "Now comes the rest of our lives." That night, they stayed in town at the Pattersons' insistence. Margaret Holloway organized a celebration that lasted until well past midnight, with food and music and laughter that seemed to wash away years of fear and silence. And in a quiet moment, standing on the Pattersons' porch watching the stars come out, Silas took Hetty's hand. "I never said it back." "Said what?" "What you said to me on the porch, before we came to town." He turned to face her, his pale eyes soft in the lamplight. "I love you, Hetty. I didn't think I could. Didn't think I'd ever feel that way again. But I do." Hetty's heart swelled until she thought it might burst. "I know." "You know?" "I've known for a while. You're not as good at hiding it as you think." Silas laughed, a real laugh, full and warm and alive. "Come here." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, long and deep and full of promise. And when they finally broke apart, Hetty knew that everything she'd been through, every rejection, every humiliation, every moment of despair, had led her here, to this man, to this moment, to a love she'd never expected and couldn't live without. "Take me home," she whispered. And Silas did. The months that followed were the happiest Hetty had ever known. Summer faded into autumn, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The cabin that had once felt like a refuge now felt like something more. A home. A real home, filled with warmth and laughter, and the quiet comfort of two people who'd found their way to each other through darkness. Silas changed. The haunted look in his eyes softened. The silences grew shorter. He started talking about the future, making plans, dreaming out loud in ways Hetty suspected he hadn't done since Sarah died. And Hetty changed too. The shame she'd carried her whole life, the constant awareness of her body as something wrong, something to apologize for, began to fade. Silas looked at her like she was beautiful, touched her like she was precious, loved her like she was exactly enough. Maybe she was starting to believe it. "You're smiling again." Hetty looked up from the bread dough she was kneading. Silas stood in the doorway, his arms full of firewood, watching her with that soft expression that still made her heart flutter. "Am I not allowed to smile?" "You're allowed to do anything you want." He set down the wood and crossed to her, his hands settling on her hips. "I just like knowing what put it there." "You?" Hetty turned in his arms, flour-dusted hands resting on his chest. "You put it there." Silas kissed her forehead. "Good." They stood like that for a moment, wrapped in each other, the fire crackling and the bread rising, and the world outside feeling very far away. Then Hetty's stomach lurched. She pulled away abruptly, one hand flying to her mouth. "Hetty?" She barely made it outside before she was sick, her body heaving, her legs trembling beneath her. Silas was right behind her, one hand on her back, his voice tight with concern. "What's wrong? Are you ill? Should I ride for the doctor?" Hetty straightened slowly, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. Her mind was racing, counting days, adding up symptoms she'd been too busy to notice. "I don't think I'm ill." "Then what? Silas?" She turned to face him, her heart pounding. "I think I'm pregnant." The color drained from his face. For a long, terrible moment, he didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there, staring at her with eyes that had gone blank with fear. "Silas?" "No." The word came out strangled. "No, you can't be." "I think I am. My monthly courses are late. I've been tired, nauseous." "No." He stepped back, shaking his head. "This can't happen. Not again. I can't." "Silas, listen to me." "Sarah died." His voice cracked. "The baby died. I held them both while they went cold. I buried them in the ground behind this cabin. I can't do that again. I can't." He was trembling now, his whole body shaking with a terror so deep it seemed to consume him entirely. Hetty reached for him. "I'm not Sarah." "Every woman says that until the bleeding starts." He pulled away from her touch. "Until the baby comes wrong, and there's nothing anyone can do, and I have to watch you die knowing it's my fault." "It wouldn't be your fault." "It's always my fault. Everything is always my fault." Silas's breathing was ragged. "I should have been more careful. I should have... God, Hetty, I can't lose you. I can't." She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. "Listen to me, Silas Garrett. I am not going to die. This baby is not going to die. We are going to be a family, and we are going to be happy, and you are going to stop letting your fear steal our joy." "You don't know that. You can't promise." Neither could Sarah. Neither could any woman who ever carried a child. But they did it anyway, because that's what courage is. Hetty's voice softened. Being afraid and doing it anyway. Loving something even when you know you might lose it. That's the only way any of us survive. Silas stared at her, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I'm so scared," he whispered. "I know. So am I." She pulled him close, holding him tight. "But we'll be scared together, and we'll figure it out together, just like we figured out everything else." They stood there for a long time, holding each other, while the fear slowly ebbed and something else took its place. Hope. Fragile, tentative, but real. "We should go to town," Silas said finally, his voice hoarse. "See the doctor. Make sure everything's all right." "Tomorrow." "Today. Right now." Hetty pulled back to look at him. "Silas, please." His eyes were desperate. "I need to know you're okay. I need someone who knows what they're doing to tell me this is going to be different." She could have argued. Could have told him he was overreacting, that pregnant women didn't need to rush to doctors at the first sign of nausea. But she understood. This wasn't about logic. This was about a man who'd lost everything once and couldn't bear the thought of losing everything again. "All right," she said softly. "Let's go." Dr. Collins confirmed what Hetty already knew. "About 2 months along, I'd say." He smiled as he put away his instruments. "Everything looks perfectly healthy. Strong heartbeat, good positioning. You're a sturdy woman, Mrs. Garrett. Built for this." Built for this. Hetty had spent her whole life being told her body was wrong. Too big, too much, too different. And now a doctor was telling her that the very thing she'd been shamed for, her strength, her size, her solidity, was exactly what would keep her baby safe. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "What about risks?" Silas asked, his voice tight. "Complications? What should we watch for?" "The usual things. Excessive bleeding, severe pain, fever." "But honestly, Mr. Garrett, your wife is one of the healthiest expectant mothers I've seen." Dr. Collins clapped him on the shoulder. "Try not to worry too much. Nature knows what it's doing." Try not to worry. Hetty could have told the doctor that was like asking the sun not to rise. Silas would worry every day until the baby was born, and probably every day after that, too. But that was love. That was what it meant to care about someone so much that their safety became more important than your own peace of mind. They stayed in town that night, at the Pattersons' insistence. Mrs. Patterson cried when she heard the news, happy tears this time. And Mr. Patterson broke out a bottle of whiskey that he claimed he'd been saving for a special occasion. "To the Garretts," he said, raising his glass, "and to the newest member of our little family." "Hear, hear," Mrs. Patterson echoed. Silas's hand found Hetty's under the table. His grip was tight, almost desperate. But when she looked at him, she saw something besides fear in his eyes. She saw wonder. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, just as Dr. Collins had predicted. Hetty's body changed in ways that fascinated and terrified her. Her belly swelled, her breasts grew heavy. Her appetite became voracious. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel ashamed of her size. She felt powerful, strong, capable of miracles. Silas watched over her like a hawk, hardly letting her lift a finger witut rushing to help. It drove Hetty crazy sometimes, but she understood. Every time he looked at her growing belly, he was seeing Sarah. Every kick, every movement, every sign of life was a reminder of what he'd lost, and how much he stood to lose again. She let him fuss, let him hover, let him work through his fear in the only way he knew how. And slowly, gradually, she watched that fear transform into something else. "Feel this." She grabbed his hand one evening and pressed it to her belly. "She's kicking." Silas's eyes went wide. "She?" "Just a feeling I have," Hetty smiled. "Strong kicks. Like she's trying to tell us she's ready to take on the world." Silas's hand trembled against her stomach. Then his face crumpled, and he dropped to his knees, pressing his lips to the swell where their child grew. "I love you," he whispered. "Both of you. So much it hurts." Hetty's fingers tangled in his hair. "I know." "I'm still scared." "I know that too." "But I'm also happy." He looked up at her, tears streaming down his face. "Happier than I've been in years. Is that wrong? To be happy when I'm also terrified?" "It's not wrong. It's human." Hetty pulled him to his feet and into her arms. "That's what living is, Silas. Joy and fear all tangled up together. You can't have one without the other." "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just weren't paying attention." He laughed, a real laugh, and kissed her until they were both breathless. Winter came hard that year. Snow buried the cabin up to the windows, and the wind howled like something alive and angry. Silas spent most of his time chopping wood, checking supplies, making sure they had everything they needed to survive until spring. Hetty spent most of her time growing bigger and more uncomfortable, counting the days until her body would be her own again. 2 more months, Dr. Collins had said at her last checkup. maybe less. This baby's eager. 2 months felt like an eternity. She was washing dishes one evening when the first pain hit. It started in her lower back, a dull ache that she'd been feeling for days, but suddenly sharpened into something fierce. She gasped, dropping the cup she'd been holding. "Hetty?" Silas was at her side in an instant. "It's probably nothing." She gripped the edge of the counter. "Just a cramp." Then another pain hit, stronger this time, and she felt a gush of warmth between her legs. "Oh God!" "What? What is it?" "My water!" Hetty looked down at the puddle forming at her feet. "Silas, the baby's coming." For one horrible moment, he froze. She saw the terror in his eyes, the memories crashing over him, the ghost of Sarah standing between them. Then something shifted. His jaw tightened, his shoulders squared, and when he looked at her again, the fear was still there, but it was buried beneath something stronger. Determination. "Can you walk?" "I think so." "Good. We're going to town." "Silas, it's the middle of a blizzard." "I don't care if it's the end of the world. You're not having this baby alone in this cabin. Not like—" He stopped himself. "You're not." Hetty wanted to argue. The snow was deep, the wind was brutal, and traveling in her condition was dangerous. But she also knew Silas was right. If something went wrong, they needed help. Real help. Not just each other and a prayer. "All right," she said. "Let's go." The ride down the mountain was the longest of Hetty's life. The contractions came faster now, harder, each one stealing her breath and sending waves of agony through her body. She clung to Silas, her face pressed against his back, her hands fisted in his coat. "Almost there," he kept saying. "Almost there, Hetty. Hold on." She held on. Through the snow and the wind and the pain that threatened to tear her apart, she held on. They reached Copper Creek just as dawn was breaking. Silas practically carried her into Dr. Collins's office, his face wild with fear. "The baby," he gasped. "It's coming." Dr. Collins took one look at Hetty and sprang into action. "Get her on the table. Someone fetch my nurse. Boil water. Lots of it." He was already rolling up his sleeves. "How far apart are the contractions?" "I don't know. Close. Very close." "Then we don't have much time." The next hours blurred together in a haze of pain and fear and desperate effort. Hetty pushed until she thought her body would break. Silas held her hands so tight she lost feeling in her fingers. Dr. Collins worked with steady, competent hands, guiding the baby into the world 1 impossible inch at a time. "One more push," the doctor said. "Give me one more, Mrs. Garrett." Hetty screamed, pushed, felt something tear loose from inside her. And then, impossibly, wonderfully, the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard filled the room. A baby's cry. "It's a girl," Dr. Collins said, his voice thick with emotion. "A perfect, healthy girl." He placed the baby in Hetty's arms, and the world stopped spinning. She was so small, so perfect. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, a shock of dark hair, and eyes that blinked up at Hetty like she was the most fascinating thing in the universe. "Hello," Hetty whispered. "Hello, little one." Silas made a sound beside her, something between a laugh and a sob. His hand reached out, trembling, to touch the baby's cheek. "She's real," he said hoarsely. "She's alive." "She is. We both are." Silas looked at Hetty, and his face was transformed. All the fear, all the grief, all the guilt he'd been carrying for years seemed to lift away, replaced by something pure and bright and overwhelming. "I love you," he said. "I love you both so much I can't breathe." "Then don't breathe. Just stay here with us." Hetty smiled through her tears. "Stay here forever." "I will," he promised. "Forever." They named her Hope. It seemed fitting, after everything they'd been through. She was their hope made flesh, They're proof that even the darkest nights eventually gave way to dawn. The town embraced her as one of their own. Mrs. Patterson knitted blankets and booties. Mr. Patterson carved a wooden rattle. Margaret Holloway organized a celebration that brought half of Copper Creek to their cabin, bearing gifts and good wishes. Even some of the women who'd once mocked Hetty came, their faces apologetic, their words careful. "She's beautiful," Cordelia Morrison's former friend said, peering into the cradle. "Absolutely beautiful." Hetty accepted their compliments graciously. She'd learned that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about choosing to move forward instead of staying trapped in the past. George Morrison and his wife had left town months ago, driven out by the scandal of his brother's crimes and the collapse of his reputation. No one knew where they'd gone. No one much cared. "Good riddance," Mrs. Patterson said whenever their names came up. "This town's better off without them." Hetty didn't disagree. 1 year to the day after Hope was born, Hetty stood on the porch of their cabin, watching her daughter take her first wobbly steps across the meadow. Silas walked beside her, bent low, his hands ready to catch her if she fell. "Come on, sweet girl," he coaxed. "Come to Mama." Hope giggled and lurched forward, her chubby legs churning, her arms windmilling for balance. She made it 3 steps before toppling into the grass. Instead of crying, she laughed, delighted by this new game of falling and getting up again. Silas scooped her up and carried her to the porch, his face split in a grin. "Did you see that? 3 whole steps!" "I saw." Hetty reached for her daughter, settling Hope on her hip. "She'll be running before we know it." "God help us both." They stood together, the 3 of them, watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The same colors Hetty remembered from her first autumn here, when everything had been uncertain and frightening and new. Now it was home. "I've been thinking," Silas said quietly. "Dangerous habit." He smiled, but didn't rise to the bait. "I've been thinking about the future, about what kind of life we want to build for her." Hetty looked at Hope, at her dark curls and her bright eyes, and her stubborn little chin that she'd inherited from both of them. "What did you have in mind?" "I want her to grow up knowing she's loved, knowing she's enough, exactly as she is. I don't want her to spend her life feeling like she has to apologize for existing. Neither do I. Then we'll make sure she doesn't. We'll raise her to be strong and kind and brave." Silas's arm tightened around Hetty's waist. "And when she's old enough, we'll tell her our story. How her mama came to town with nothing but a carpetbag and a prayer. How everyone said she wasn't worth helping. How she proved them all wrong." Hetty's throat tightened. "That's a lot to live up to." "She won't have to live up to anything. She just has to be herself." Silas turned Hetty to face him. "That's what you taught me, you know. That just being yourself is enough. That you don't have to earn love or prove your worth. You just have to show up and be real." "I taught you that?" "You taught me everything." He leaned in and kissed her, soft and sweet. "I was dead before you came, Hetty. Going through the motions, waiting to stop breathing. You brought me back to life." "You brought yourself back. I just gave you a reason to try." Hope squirmed between them, reaching for Silas's beard with grabby fingers. He took her, lifting her high above his head until she shrieked with laughter. "You think she'll have your stubbornness or mine?" he asked. "Both. We're doomed." "Probably." He lowered Hope back to his chest, cradling her close. "But I wouldn't have it any other way." They went inside as the sun began to set, the 3 of them together in the cabin that had seen so much pain and so much healing. Hetty made supper, while Silas played with Hope on the floor, building towers of wooden blocks for her to knock down. It was ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of evening that happened in homes all across the territory. And yet to Hetty, it felt like a miracle. This life she'd built from nothing, This family she'd found when everyone told her she didn't deserve one. This love that had grown in the most unlikely soil and bloomed into something beautiful. She thought about the girl who'd stepped off that stagecoach 2 years ago, hungry and scared and certain that she was worthless. She wished she could go back and tell that girl what was coming, that the rejection was just the beginning, that the pain was making room for something better, that somewhere in those mountains there was a man waiting to see her truly, and a baby waiting to be born, and a future brighter than anything she'd ever dared to imagine. But maybe it was better not to know. Maybe the not knowing was part of what made the finding so sweet. After Hope was asleep, tucked into the cradle Silas had carved with his own hands, Hetty stood by the window looking out at the stars. Silas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything," Hetty leaned into him. "Nothing. The past, the future. And the regrets? Not one. Not even the hard parts, the cruelty, the rejection, the fear. Especially not those." She turned in his arms. "Those parts led me here. To you. To hope. To this life I never thought I could have. How could I regret the road that brought me home?" Silas's eyes glistened. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not," she smiled. "But you stuck with me anyway. Best thing that ever happened to me." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and Hetty felt the last lingering traces of her old shame dissolve like morning frost in the sun. She was Henrietta Garrett, wife, mother, survivor. She was strong and stubborn and imperfect and real. She was enough. She had always been enough. And standing there in her husband's arms, with her daughter sleeping peacefully nearby, and the mountains keeping watch outside, she finally, truly believed it. The unwanted woman of Copper Creek had found exactly where she belonged. Not because she changed to fit the world's expectations, but because she found people brave enough to love her exactly as she was. And that made all the difference.